Thanks for coming this morning. I'm Lorena Reynolds. I'm an attorney out of Corvallis, and I represent Jones Hollister. Jones is the petitioner in the Lane County case in re Hollister, which is now pending in the Oregon Court of Appeals. In 2017, counties across Oregon started approving petitions allowing legal recognition of people who are non-binary. In 2018, the legislature held hearings and changed the law to make it clear that legal sex designations should be based on a person's gender identity and not on outdated ideas about sex and gender. This case seeks to implement uniform statewide access to this procedure. Not only does Jones have a statutory right under ORS 33.460 to this change, they also have a constitutional right under the First and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution and under Article 1, Section 20 of the Oregon Constitution. At least 12 Oregon counties regularly approve these petitions, but Lane County does not. There is nothing new about folks living between the space of male and female or living entirely outside the gender binary. They have always been part of our families and part of our communities. What is different is that we are finally recognizing the impact that archaic laws have on the lives of real people who deserve to be seen and recognized for who they are. Allowing this simple legal procedure to be available to everyone, regardless of where they live in the state, is a step towards ending the discrimination and harassment that puts non-binary people at risk every day. I appreciate pioneers like Jones who are on the forefront of these equity issues, insisting that they have the same rights to this legal process regardless of where they live. Jones's persistence in pursuing this matter will help bring non-binary Oregonians out of the shadows. In this appeal, we are asking the Court of Appeals to rule that the 2018 legislative changes require all circuit court judges across the state to approve non-binary gender designation.
In January, I went to the Lane County Courthouse to get the legal forms to change my name and my legal marker. I read the option for non-binary and I cried. I am non-binary. I was raised as a girl, but I am not a she. I have never been a she. I am a they. As a child, I knew I really didn't fit in anywhere in the two-gender world. As a teen, I found acceptance in the Unitarian Universalist Church and its youth program and with my close friends. I started to use Joe as my name, as it is more gender neutral. I didn't have a way to describe my gender until I first heard the term non-binary. I immediately knew that it described who I am, not man or woman, but both and also neither. I was and remain scared to be myself in all of my life. I fear being attacked or killed. I fear losing my career, I fear rejection, and I fear losing my friends and my family. I don't have a date when I told everyone in my life that I am trans and non-binary. I've done it over the years as I found better terms to describe my gender, as society has become more accepting and as I've felt safer. Coming out means that I've got to explain to people who I am and convince them to accept that being non-binary is a real thing. And quite frankly, it is pretty brutal to be told over and over again that my gender is confusing and that it's too hard to use my pronouns. It is awful to be told by strangers and family that who I am is not valid. Over the years, I've become more vocal about my gender, despite the challenges I've faced, and the support and acceptance that I have found has been empowering. In my last 4 years teaching, I was Mr. Joe. I let everyone assume my pronoun was he, just as I'd let them assume for decades that I was a she. I hesitated to be fully out as a non-binary trans teacher. Not being called she was a gift, absolutely. But I'm also not a he, and that made it clear. I regret the choice to tell a partial truth. Over the years, I have become increasingly unwilling to be misgendered, and I wanted no one to use my, at the time, feminine legal name. It became clear to me that I needed to be myself in all of my life. When I went to change my legal name and marker in court, the judge told me that he wouldn't let me be non-binary. I have spent my life marking F on forms, and it isn't representative of who I am. I am not a female, and I am not a male. I am non-binary, and that's why I'm appealing. I want to be legally who I am, and I am appealing because none of my non-binary siblings should be told no like I was. We should all have the freedom to tell the truth, to tell our stories, to live our lives as our authentic selves. What I'm asking is that I be able to mark the correct box on forms. I hope that the Court of Appeals overturns this ruling and allows me to do so.
Sorry.
It's all good. Oh no, I pressed a button. Okay. Hi there, my name is Kieran Chase. Like many of the folks up here, I use gender neutral pronouns, they, them, and theirs. If you have any questions about using gender neutral pronouns in your writing, please feel absolutely welcome to ask me or any of the other folks. Well, sorry, I'm not going to volunteer anyone else, but feel free to ask me. After me, we're going to hear from Joanna Bartlett, to my right here, who is a parent of a non-binary child who lives here in Eugene. And then we'll hear from Felix Hart, who works with the local Eugene organization Transponder, which is an organization that serves the trans community. So I work for Basic Rights Oregon. I'm the Transgender Justice Program Manager at Basic Rights. Basic Rights Oregon has been absolutely honored to partner with the ACLU of Oregon to ensure that Oregon's courts consider the voices of non-binary Oregonians across the state, as well as the impact that their decision is going to have on this community. Basic Rights Oregon is a statewide organization that's been working for over 20 years to advance legal and lived equality for LGBTQ Oregonians, including the non-binary community. Some of the work that we've done includes having worked with the Department of Motor Vehicles to add X-gender markers to state ID cards, which allows non-binary people an option other than M or F on their state ID. We also worked to pass the legislation that Lorena spoke about earlier, which updated and removed barriers in the process for a person to legally change their name and gender marker. Following the passage of that legislation, we have worked on making sure that that legislation is implemented equitably across our state. We've worked with the Department of Justice, with attorneys, with judges all over the state. And the ACLU has been an incredible partner to us in this work. Oregon has been a national leader when it comes to recognizing non-binary identities. When this when the Department of Motor Vehicles began issuing IDs with X-gender markers in 2017, Oregon was actually the first state in the country to do so, to offer a means of legal recognition for non-binary people. And now nearly 20 states have stepped forward to offer X-gender markers on their IDs or via court orders or both. And then something that we know is that in Oregon alone, there are more than 4,000 Oregonians who have gotten an X-gender marker on their driver's license since 2017. So today we filed this brief alongside the ACLU of Oregon, and for that brief, we conducted interviews with more than a dozen non-binary Oregonians all over the state. And what we talked about in these interviews was what it means for us as non-binary people to live in a state that actually offers legal recognition of who we are. Non-binary people from all walks of life and from all over the state shared their stories to help the courts understand our experiences. Participants talked about the emotional harm that comes from having no choice but to select a gender marker that isn't accurate, that doesn't demonstrate who they are. They talked about what it's like to have that false marker show up everywhere, from health insurance documents to employment contacts to apartment leases to job applications. They talked about, and Jones touched on this, but they talked about the exhaustion that comes with explaining and justifying themselves every single day, just in order to walk through the world and be seen for who they actually are. They talked about, and then folks talked about what it has meant to feel supported by the state, by a binding legal document that allows them to state who they are and not have that statement be challenged. Legal recognition of non-binary genders has had a profound impact on the non-binary community in this state and across the country. The folks who participated in this amicus are neighbors, or in this Friends of the Court brief. These folks are neighbors and friends and coworkers and spouses and parents, and non-binary people are part of every community in this state, and every single one of us deserves to have our identity recognized no matter where in the state we live. Thank you.
Can we pause for a second?
Sure.
Do you want to add in a mic?
No, I'm not good.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Joanna Bartlett, and I'm the parent of a transgender non-binary child. This is Ben. When I took Ben to change their name and gender marker at the Lane County Courthouse in 2018, they were 11 years old, and I thought it would be relatively easy. We fill in the forms, we check the right gender box, pay the fee, things get signed, the magic of the law happens, my kid is affirmed and validated, and we have a piece of paper to show, if needed, that my child truly is a different gender to the one that they were incorrectly assigned at birth. We'd already gone through a lot to get to that point, a year after Ben first came out as non-binary gender. I didn't expect the judge to refuse to sign the form, to deny my child the recognition and validation in their gender that they are entitled to under Oregon law. He expected me to be able to argue the state statute and to prove why he should sign the document. I'm not a lawyer. I just talked to the people at the info desk to make sure I filled out everything correctly. I hadn't looked up and memorized the state statute. I couldn't even Google it in the courtroom because I couldn't use my cell phone. I just knew that my child needed to have their identity validated and made legal, and that they should be able to do that it was an option for them in Oregon. There was a box for it on the form provided to us by the Lane County Court. So we were standing there at a stalemate, and rather than have both the name change and gender marker change denied, I talked with Ben, and they had the grace and the maturity to agree to move forward with the name change and to deal with the gender marker later. Afterward, we had a subdued celebration at Full City Cafe with a mocha and a treat, and I promised Ben that I would figure out how to legally change their gender in Oregon, and then I took him to school. After school that day, we went to the DMV and got Ben an Oregon ID card with their new legal name and an X gender marker without any issue at all. Later that year, I went to Multnomah County Courthouse, where I was treated with respect, and the process was smooth, no questions asked, just following the law. I shouldn't have had to do that. I shouldn't have had to drive 2 hours each way, go to court, pay another filing fee. I should have been able to do that for my child right here in Lane County where we live. My 11-year-old child should not have had to face a judge who told them that they didn't exist. For Ben, having the validation by the court has been meaningful and affirming. When they've encountered people who have said that there are only two genders or that they must be the gender that they were assigned at birth, they know that's not true. They have a legal document that says otherwise. Denying that, based on personal prejudice, is, in Ben's words, really dumb. I'm grateful to Jones for taking up this issue, although I am sorry that they had a similar experience as Ben did. There's a twist to the story. Over the last 2.5 years, since Ben first told me about their gender identity, I've done a lot of learning and reading and educating myself so that I can be a good parent and advocate for them. And in learning more about gender identity and expression, I've discovered that I'm non-binary gender myself. I haven't changed my gender markers yet, though, because I currently can't in Lane County. And that isn't okay. We need to ensure that all non-binary people anywhere in Oregon are treated the same way when they go to court to have their gender marker changed to reflect who they truly are. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Felix. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a staff member at Transponder, which is a local a transgender founded and led nonprofit here in Eugene and Springfield that provides support, resources, and education for the trans community and our allies. I'm here today to support Jones and the appeals of those denied gender marker changes just because they are non-binary. I personally am non-binary and agender. To me, that means I don't fit into either the male or female categories. When I have to check an M or an F on documentation, I'm not sure what to do. I have sex characteristics of both, and I don't identify as either, and so neither of these make sense for me. One of the first things I did when I moved to Oregon was go get my driver's license. I was actually looking forward to getting the X gender marker. I was excited to go to the DMV. Having documentation that reflects the reality of who I am is empowering. It acknowledges my experience, and it's one place I don't have to feel invisible or cringe when I look at it. I'm actually excited now to show people my ID, unflattering photo or not. I feel happy to show people the X. Having a court document that affirms a third gender marker helps trans people with our mental health and dysphoria, and helps raise general awareness in the community about the existence of non-binary people. At Transponder, we have our fingers on the pulse of the widespread impact on this X gender marker on the licenses, both in terms of direct impact on our transgender diverse community and the community at large. Since the implementation of the X gender marker on driver's licenses, we've seen a positive shift in the morale of the trans community. When our state acknowledges and backs us, we feel empowered and like we have recourse when we are mistreated. With state backing, we have noticed an increase in the openness of local businesses, medical offices, and other organizations to learn from us how to be more inclusive of multiple genders, including their language and paperwork. We've received an increase of positive feedback and greater satisfaction with services in the community. We've seen transgender youth becoming more expressive of themselves and with less anxiety to show up as they are, with their cisgender peers becoming increasingly tolerant and understanding of their peers. We want to continue this trend of people in our community being accepted and validated for who they are. When the state recognizes us, awareness in the greater population grows. It's a core human need to be acknowledged and accepted, and the benefits are tremendous for something as simple as a correct gender marker.
Thanks. We can open up for questions if there's any.
So where does the case stand now?
So the opening, I guess that's me.
That's you.
So the opening brief was filed last Friday. The Friends of the Court brief are all due tomorrow. So some of those were filed today and some are being filed tomorrow. At that point in time, we were waiting to see if there'll be any opposition briefs filed. And then following that, there'll be oral argument and then a decision from the court.
So Oregon law says one thing, but what I'm hearing is Lane County is doing another thing. Like, how does that work? I don't understand.
So the statute was changed in 2018, and it was left open in terms of how we define the sex marker. The judge in Lane County believes that because it doesn't specifically say non-binary, that the judge is limited to what the judge perceives as the historic binary of only being able to choose male or female. The 2018 legislature, however, specifically says that in issuing a legal sex marker designation change, in those cases, you're supposed to look at somebody's gender identity. And it doesn't specifically say male, female, or non-binary. It's open. So all of the other counties that have looked at this have interpreted that to mean that you can issue a non-binary designation that's consistent with somebody's gender identity. This particular judge is operating under an outdated understanding of sex and gender. Really, he's importing an archaic sense of what it means to have a gender identity into what is currently the law.
Are you aware of how many people in Lane County are facing a similar situation where the judge is denying this?
We don't have those numbers yet. That may be something that's available, but part of this process is that you're allowed to ask for your records to be sealed. Whether it's granted or denied, you can ask that it be sealed. So there's not going to be a way to ever tell all of those numbers unless OJD does a compilation of the sealed cases, which to date, to my knowledge, they haven't done. So we don't know that. The only way we really find out about these cases is if somebody, after being denied, then goes and seeks legal assistance, and there's very few legal resources available to help in those types of cases. So Jones is sort of the unusual circumstance where they took it upon themselves to find an attorney that was willing to go do that. For a lot of folks, it's much easier to go to Portland to do that rather than going through this process of having, to wait 2 years for your marker change.
Could you share the judge's name again?
It's Judge Carlson.
Jones, could you tell us more about that? So what I heard is that you could have gone to another court, but instead you decided to fight this, to appeal the decision with the Court of Appeals. Can you tell us why you made that decision?
Yeah, and I'm going to add something else as well. I know that I could go to the DMV and have an X, but then my DMV ID only helps me in certain situations. It's not a court paperwork that says that I am non-binary, so I can't go and use that to go. I was born in Washington State, and so I want to change my my marker and ID on my birth certificate. To do that, I need to have legal paperwork from Oregon. An X on my DMV is not going to be adequate. If I were to want to get a passport, I would need to have legal paperwork and my birth certificate. If I want to change it, that information on my records at the doctor's office and other places, I need to have that legal paperwork. So I just want to be clear, it is wonderful that we can do it on our Oregon state IDs and driver's licenses, but that's not enough. I'm doing this part because that is not enough. That is like putting a Band-Aid on a problem, as far as I'm concerned. It's helpful, but it doesn't deal with the underlying issue. And then now I've forgotten the original question. I'm so sorry.
I'm just wondering if you could tell us why you chose to appeal the decision.
Yeah. Yeah. When I stood there in the courtroom and he was telling me that what the judge told me was that he would change my sex marker to male with no problem at all, but he wouldn't do non-binary, and that if I wanted to pursue that with him, that I would need to have a court hearing. My response, having no lawyer at the time, was I will ask my lawyer, because the first thing that came into my mind was all of the people that I know who are non-binary. My friends, the youth that I've worked with, my students, the parents, other teachers, folks in my community in general, and I just envisioned all of them having to go in front of this judge and being told no, and they don't all have the financial resources to do that. They don't all have the kind of the life that will allow that. I am fortunate in that I am not concerned because of my privilege about being fired from a job because I am being a visible person doing this. I have a lot of privilege and a lot of support structures that a lot of people just don't have. And it is an unreasonable burden to tell somebody that they have to go to another county and tell them, I don't live here, but I'm going to say I'm from here. That's not okay. I want to be in my courthouse in my county where I live and do this. And so it's for me and my needs, but also because this is an issue that faces all of us in Lane County.
For anyone who is non-binary, who does or doesn't have ex-gender markers, could you explain the meaning of that, what it's meant to you?
I can start very briefly. I go to the doctor's office and I get called her. They have to go and look at the pop-up thing that comes up to tell them, and they don't all know to do that. I have awkward situations of walking out of the men's room, which is much more congruent with how I look, and having people call me she, which I think is disconcerting to everyone around me. It is disconcerting to me. I think that living with that is awkward, but also I feel like I'm not telling the truth about who I am. And being honest is very important to me. It is part of how I live through the world. It is part of my spiritual practice. And so to be faced with paperwork where I have to choose one or the other is actually heartbreaking every time.
Oh my gosh, I keep pushing buttons on this. I really hope I didn't destroy it. Go ahead.
If people have a moment, or just the folks in the room, we have a law professor here who also worked on the brief, and would like to say something about gender equality in Oregon, if there's a moment.
Okay, I can go ahead and share.
But yeah.
Yeah, just that, I work with trans folks every single day in my job, and I can talk about what having a non-binary gender marker has meant for me, but I can also talk about what it's meant to have folks from Eugene call me and tell me about their kiddo crying in court this morning because a judge told them no. And I can talk about how when we were interviewing folks for this brief, we talked to someone who, on the very day that the DMV started issuing X-gender markers, they showed up at the DMV an hour before they opened and just waited for the doors to open and just started crying as soon as they were handed an identification card that really showed who they were. It's incredibly exciting to be living in a time when non-binary people are starting to be recognized. It's not a small thing. It's a mark on a piece of paper, and I think that that can make it feel like it's not something that's very significant or very large, but when you're talking about a community of people that has literally, or I guess figuratively, been rendered invisible by the fact that we simply don't show up. If you're doing research, we're not included, right? There's no box to check for folks who are non-binary, for folks who use an X-gender marker on their identification. It's incredibly powerful to finally be able to say, and this is something that was echoed again and again throughout the brief that we filed by different interviewees, that to just be able to say, I'm here, I exist, I'm valid, and my state says so. My state agrees with me on this. I can't really overstate how important and significant it has felt.
I'm so glad that I could join you, and it's good to see you in person, to meet you. So my name's Sarah Adams Shane, and I'm a professor here at the University of Oregon School of Law, and it's really been my privilege to work on this amicus brief that I've drafted with the help of some of my students who are in here today. The late David Schumann, who passed untimely while we were working on the brief, and and some of my colleagues who've also, even in the last 24 hours, given me just some fantastic feedback. But the reason that it's been most rewarding, I would say, is twofold. One is, because you're a person, right, and a citizen of the state, and not only does this particular law guarantee you this right that you tried to exercise and weren't able to, but the state of Oregon actually has an amazing track record in terms of, in particular, gender equality. And all states, including Oregon, have not had a perfect track record in terms of equal rights and human rights. But in the area of gender equality, over the last many decades, the state has made fantastic gains and has really been a front runner with the 2007 Oregon Equality Act, which recognized that discrimination on the basis of gender and gender identity in particular is it's degrading to human dignity. The state recognized that in that act, the Oregon Equality Act of 2007. And even before then, the state has, through the state courts, recognized that the state constitution protects against gender-based discrimination and has a broad understanding of what gender-based discrimination means. You know, so what the state did in 2017 when it amended the law that we're talking about today is a step in that, you know, direction of that trajectory of really recognizing the fundamental nature of equality, right, as a democratic, you know, right, and gender equality, and recognize that when a person has to live their life being labeled a gender that's not their true gender, that is a harm, and it can be prevented. And the state, if you know, I had the privilege of looking through the legislative history for that 2017 act that amended ORS 33460, which is, who wants to know all those numbers? But that's, you know, that's what we're talking about, right? And you know, on the techie, uninteresting side of things. But that when the state amended that, if you look through that legislative history, you see over and over again the co-chief sponsors of that bill, the legislators, the advocates, all talking about the importance of having that, you know, that marker in your legal documents that matches who you really are. And there is nothing in there to suggest they intended that to somehow not include everyone, right? In fact, it's the opposite. They intended it to include everyone. That's consistent with the tradition of the state of Oregon in this area. And anyway, because of all that, myself and many other professors, law professors from the 3 Oregon law schools are signing on to this brief. I would give you a number, but I'm still getting emails asking if it's too late to sign on. And excuse me, I have a cold. But no, to me, it's rewarding. It's a privilege to be able to work on that brief, and I'm so happy to see the law professor community step up and ask to be able to put their names on it.
Thank you. I know some folks have to go. Are there any more questions, though?